Life at Westfield moved at a slower pace as it was a small, quiet yet peaceful town. People didn't lock their doors and neighbors watched out for each other. It was the kind of place where no one expected anything to happen, especially not something as dark and mysterious as a disappearance. Monica Hale had lived in Westfield for most of her life. A single mother working as a nurse, she was well liked by everyone who knew her. She was dependable, hardworking, and loved by her daughter, Rachel. Her job at the local hospital kept her busy, working the night shifts most days, but Monica always made time for her daughter. They had a quiet life, filled with the simple routines that come with small-town living. On the evening of October 12th, everything changed. Monica's shift was supposed to end at 7 a.m. the following day. Rachel's aunt had agreed to take care of her for the night, and Monica had planned to pick her up after work. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that could hint at the nightmare that was about to unfold. But when 7 a.m. came and went, there was still no sign of Monica. Rachel waited anxiously as she had done many times before, watching the clock tick by. But her mother never showed up. At first, her aunt thought maybe Monica had stayed late at the hospital to finish some paperwork, but when hours passed, the worry began to set in. Monica's absence wasn't like her. She always kept her promises to Rachel. So, by the time 10 a.m. rolled around, Rachel's aunt, concerned, called the hospital. No one had seen Monica. Her car was still parked in the hospital lot, the keys in the ignition, the phone left behind on the passenger seat. But there was no sign of Monica. No message. No note. The police were called in and an investigation was quickly underway. Monica's co-workers and friends were questioned. Had anyone noticed anything strange in the days leading up to her disappearance? No. Everyone said the same thing. She had been acting completely normal, nothing out of the ordinary at all. She hadn't seemed stressed, anxious, or upset in any way. Days passed, but no one had any new information. The case went cold almost immediately with no leads to follow. Her disappearance became just another unsolved mystery in a town that had never seen anything like it. Westfield had never been touched by crime or tragedy, until now. It wasn't until 3 days later that the first real clue in Monica's case emerged. The tip came in from an unlikely source, a truck driver named Steve Miller. He had been traveling through the area at night, on his usual route through the backroads outside of town. He'd been driving for years and had seen plenty of strange things, but nothing like what he experienced that night. Steve was tuning through the radio frequencies in his truck as he made his way down the winding highway. It was late and the roads were empty, the night eerily quiet. As he flipped through the channels, something caught his ear. At first, he thought it was just static, but as he listened closer, it became clear that something, or someone, was trying to communicate. Through the crackling noise, a voice emerged. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. "I'm not dead. I'm not. He's watching me. Don't stop searching for me. Please, you have to find me." The voice was panicked, desperate, like a woman trapped and trying to reach out for help. Steve's heart skipped a beat as he listened. The voice was so real, so filled with fear, it felt as if it were happening right there in the cab of his truck. He froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Was it some kind of prank? A glitch in the system? Or something much darker? The voice continued for a moment, but before Steve could do anything, the signal abruptly cut off. The radio was silent again, nothing but static filling the air. Steve's hand trembled as he turned the knob, trying to get the station back, but it was gone. The eerie silence in his truck was deafening. For a moment he wondered if he had imagined the whole thing. But deep down he knew he hadn't. The voice had been real. Shaking, Steve took a moment to process what had just happened. He had no idea who that woman was, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was important. He wasn't sure why, but the words she had spoken, the urgency in her voice, haunted him. The next morning, Steve couldn't stop thinking about it. He couldn't let it go. He knew he had to tell someone. Steve contacted the police and reported what he had heard. He wasn't sure how they would react, but he had to share the strange experience. At first, the officer on the phone seemed skeptical, dismissing it as just a random interference. But Steve insisted that the voice had sounded too real to be a coincidence. Eventually, the police agreed to investigate, though they weren't exactly sure where to start. They had no idea who the voice could belong to, and there was no way to trace the signal. The radio frequencies in the area were notoriously unpredictable, often picking up strange signals from neighboring counties or even farther. But Steve's insistence pushed them to take the tip seriously. The first place they checked was the hospital. Monica had worked there for years, and they suspected that she may have had some connection to whatever had caused her disappearance. But there was nothing unusual there. No leads. No suspects. The police eventually decided to retrace Steve's route from the night he heard the voice. They drove the back roads hoping to find something that might explain the strange transmission. But when they reached the area Steve had described, they found nothing. Nothing but an old, abandoned fire tower, standing tall in the middle of the forest. It hadn't been used in years, but it was still there. And then, something strange happened. As they inspected the tower, the officers began to notice something odd. There was a faint crackling noise coming from their radios, the same kind of static Steve had heard. But this time it wasn't just static. It was a voice, one that sounded eerily familiar. The voice echoed through the crackling radio, almost inaudible at first. But then clearer. "Please, they're coming for me. He's here. I'm trapped. Help me." The police exchanged nervous glances. The voice was unmistakable. It was Monica Hale's voice. The radio went silent once again. Had she been there all along? Was the fire tower involved somehow? They were no closer to finding her. But they were closer than ever to uncovering a hidden truth. The wind whistled through the abandoned fire tower as the officers stood beneath it, radios in hand, still trying to process what they had just heard. The voice, the terrified plea for help, was identical to Monica Hale's. But how could that be? She'd been missing for over a week. No calls. No sightings. No leads. And now, her voice had crackled through their radios from deep in the forest? Officer Jordan Cross, a 12-year veteran with the Westfield Police Department, was the first to speak. "We need to get inside that tower," he said. The old structure loomed above them, rusty and weather-beaten. It had been out of use for over a decade, left behind when the town got new fire response equipment. But now it felt strangely relevant, like a piece of a puzzle they hadn't known they were missing. The creaking stairs groaned under their weight as they climbed. Dust clung to every surface and cobwebs stretched across the beams. As they reached the top platform they found nothing. Just old equipment, a rusted chair, and an empty room. No signs of recent activity. No food. No footprints. Officer Ramirez scanned the small space, frustrated. "She's not here. If this is where the signal came from, there should be something." But Cross wasn't ready to give up. He moved to the corner of the room and noticed a strange panel on the wall, an old radio unit that hadn't been powered in years. It was disconnected from the power grid, its cords frayed and useless. Yet, it had just broadcast Monica's voice. They were left with more questions than answers. Back at the station, the recording was played on loop. Voice analysts were called in and they confirmed it. The voice matched Monica Hale's medical records exactly. This wasn't some imitation. It was her. The revelation sent shockwaves through the town. 4 days, Monica's disappearance had felt like a dead end. But now, the case was very much alive. And it had taken a turn into the bizarre. A detective from the state, Elise Wagner, was brought in to assist. She had worked on several strange disappearance cases before, missing persons with no logical explanation. And she saw something familiar in Monica's case. Wagner began digging into the region's emergency frequencies and discovered that 3 other strange radio transmissions had been reported in surrounding counties within the last 5 years, each from women who were later found dead, their bodies dumped in rural or wooded areas. Each transmission had included desperate pleas for help. Each voice had been traced back to women who had gone missing, but only after the signals were picked up. Could Monica be the next victim in a pattern no one had realized existed? The similarities were too strong to ignore. Wagner requested a map of local towers and possible relay stations, anything that could have picked up or bounced Monica's voice. What she found next changed everything. Less than 10 miles from the abandoned fire tower was an old, decommissioned weather facility, now privately owned. The owner? A man named Henry Corman, a reclusive former military technician with a history of working in radio communication. He had lived in Westfield for years, always kept to himself, always quiet. The townspeople described him as odd but harmless. But Wagner had a gut feeling. And her gut had never let her down. They obtained a warrant to search Henry's property. The facility was surrounded by high fences and warning signs, "Keep out, private property." When officers arrived, the gates were locked, but Henry himself came to the door. He was calm. Too calm. "I heard about the girl," he said before they could speak. "Shame what happened." Wagner asked him directly, "Do you operate any radio equipment on this property?" Henry shrugged. "I tinker. That's all. Nothing powerful. Just a hobby." But the team found otherwise. Inside his property was a fully functional underground bunker, outfitted with state-of-the-art surveillance tools, radio transmitters, and even hidden listening devices. It was more than a hobby. It was a sophisticated communication setup. Then came the chilling discovery. In a drawer beside the main console was a notebook. Inside were pages of transcribed voices, random statements, names, dates, and coordinates. One page stood out. It was dated October 12th, the night Monica vanished. "I'm not dead. He's watching me. Don't stop searching." Wagner's hand shook as she flipped the page. Below the quote were 3 numbers: latitude, longitude, and a time. Wagner and her team rushed to the location marked in the notebook. The coordinates led them deep into the woods, away from any roads. The terrain grew rougher, the silence heavier. After a grueling hour-long hike, they arrived at a clearing. There, barely visible under fallen leaves and branches, was something metallic. A trapdoor. It was old, camouflaged, and locked from the outside with a rusted latch. The officers pried it open and a staircase disappeared into darkness. The air smelled musty, thick with dust and something else, something like fear. Wagner motioned for flashlights. "We go in. Now." One by one they descended the stairs. The tunnel was narrow, the walls lined with concrete and old wiring. Then they reached it. The room. A small, windowless room, just large enough for one person to survive in. A bucket. A thin mattress. Empty food wrappers. And scratched into the wall in jagged handwriting: "Help me. My name is Monica." Wagner's heart pounded. They had found where she'd been kept. But Monica wasn't there. A trail of fresh footprints led out the opposite end of the tunnel. Someone had taken her, again, or she had escaped. But where was she now? As they turned to follow the footprints, Wagner's radio crackled to life. "He knows you're here." The voice was Monica's. "He's coming. You need to leave." Just then the lights flickered. A sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel, a slow, deliberate footstep. Then another. And another. The officers froze, flashlights shaking in their hands. Someone else was in the tunnel with them. And whoever it was, wasn't hiding anymore. The echo of footsteps grew louder in the narrow tunnel. Each step reverberated through the concrete walls, drawing closer, heavier, deliberate. Wagner held her flashlight steady, her breath shallow. "Everyone stay alert," she whispered. The officers flanked her, guns drawn. The trail of footprints ahead was no longer the most urgent concern. Whoever was approaching wasn't trying to be quiet. The team turned off their radios, leaving only the flicker of flashlights and the tense rhythm of their breath in the air. Then the footsteps stopped. Silence. Wagner strained to listen. Nothing. Just the distant hum of equipment deeper in the tunnel, and the cold chill rising in her spine. They moved forward slowly, deeper into the underground passage. The footprints continued, lighter now, more erratic, like someone running. Monica? They passed an old utility room filled with rusted filing cabinets and broken electrical boxes. Then a steel door, half open, dangling off its hinges. Inside, more signs of life: a torn blanket, an empty water bottle, and a notebook. Wagner picked it up with gloved hands. The first page was smeared and unreadable, but on the second page, a single sentence had been written over and over. "He watches through the walls. He hears everything. Don't trust the radios." She swallowed hard. She was kept here. For days. Officer cross-examined the walls, noticing small holes drilled at head height, big enough for tiny microphones. "Surveillance holes," he muttered. She wasn't just locked in, she was being studied. They pressed forward. The passage turned sharply, leading them into what looked like a control room. To their horror, it was still powered. A generator hummed in the corner and wires crisscrossed the floor, connected to blinking screens. Dozens of audio recordings lined the shelves, unmarked tapes and hard drives, some labeled only with dates. Wagner's eyes were drawn to a screen playing live footage from above, forest surveillance. One camera panned slowly past the fire tower. Another watched the trail entrance where they'd parked. "He's watching us right now," Officer Ramirez said, his voice tight. Wagner opened a drawer and froze. Inside were Polaroids. Dozens. Each one showed Monica, captured at different stages, blindfolded, unconscious, terrified. But what chilled her most were the photos at the bottom of the pile. Different women. Same expressions. Same settings. Victims who had never made the news. "We're not dealing with a kidnapping," Wagner whispered. "We're dealing with a serial predator." At the back of the control room, another metal door. This one was locked with an electronic keypad. Cross stepped forward. "We need to open this." Ramirez examined the panel. "Too risky. Could be booby-trapped." But Wagner was already scrolling through a nearby desk's notebook for clues. She stopped at a page with a series of numbers. "Try 101285, she said, remembering it from Monica's voice log. Beep. Beep. The door clicked. They braced themselves and pushed it open. Inside, a small white room, sterile and cold, like a lab. Cages lined the walls, empty now, but the center of the room was what drew them in. A single chair. Restraints on the arms. A mic above it. A monitor beside it played back sound logs. It was Monica's voice again. But this time the tone was different. "Please, I've done everything you asked. I read the script. I begged. What do you want from me?" Wagner's stomach turned. Monica hadn't just been recorded. She had been forced to speak into the radio. All the messages, the cries for help, they weren't spontaneous. They were scripted. Stage. Why? Ramirez asked aloud. Why broadcast this? Wagner didn't have an answer. But then her eyes caught something on the wall, a chart. It listed times, dates, frequencies, and next to each entry, a name. Monica Hale, 102.9 FM. Delilah Ross, 95.7. Ava Kim, 104.3. This was a pattern, a project, an experiment, and Monica was just the latest subject. As the team processed the horror of what they'd found, a new voice crackled through the static on Wagner's radio. "You shouldn't have come here." It was male. Cold. Calculated. "You've gone too far. You're in my house now." Then the lights in the tunnel cut out. Total darkness. Wagner shouted, "Get back to the entrance. Now." But the tunnel behind them had been sealed. A heavy steel door had slid shut without a sound. They were trapped. Ramirez shouted into his radio, trying to reach the backup unit outside, but all they got was static. The frequency had been jammed. Wagner grabbed a flashlight, scanning the walls. She saw something glint, a vent cover slightly ajar. "This way," she yelled. They pried it open. The narrow duct led into darkness, but it was the only way out. One by one they crawled inside. Just as Wagner climbed in, she looked back into the control room one last time. On the screen, a live feed switched. It showed the inside of the vent they were crawling through. They weren't escaping. They were being led. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the vent speakers. "You're doing exactly what I want. And she's closer than you think." Wagner's flashlight flickered. From up ahead in the vent, a faint sound. A whisper. A woman's voice. "Help, please. I'm still here." Wagner's blood ran cold. Was it Monica? Or was it another trap? The narrow air vent was suffocating. The team inched forward, every movement echoing in the silence. Wagner led the way, flashlight shaking in her hand. The voice they just heard, a woman's, was faint, fragile, but undeniably real. "Help, please. I'm still here." "Monica." Wagner called out softly, hoping for a response. No reply. They pressed on, deeper into the vent system, guided by the fading signal of the woman's voice and the gut instinct that they were running out of time. After what felt like an eternity, the vent opened into a small utility chamber. The room was dimly lit, and the air smelled of rust and mold. Wagner dropped down first, sweeping her flashlight across the space. Then she froze. In the far corner, lying motionless, was Monica Hale. Her wrists were raw from restraints, her face pale, but her eyes flickered open at the sound of footsteps. Wagner rushed to her side. "Monica, it's okay. You're safe now." Monica tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she mouthed the words, "He's still here." The team quickly secured the area. Cross-checked Monica's pulse. Ramirez radioed for emergency extraction. They'd found her and she was alive. But something still didn't sit right. Wagner scanned the room. Hidden cameras in the corners. A speaker above the door. "You took her from me," the voice growled suddenly from the intercom. "This was my show. And now it's ruined." The team spun around. Ramirez aimed his weapon at the speaker. "Shut it off," he barked. But the speaker only laughed. "You think you've won. But you haven't even begun to understand the story." A loud mechanical clang echoed above them. Trap. The exit slammed shut again. Suddenly a monitor lit up. A live feed from the forest above. A man in a hoodie standing by their SUV, tossing a match onto something. A fire. The bastard was burning the evidence, possibly even setting a trap for their backup team. Wagner acted fast. She dragged Monica toward the far end of the chamber. There was a maintenance hatch that looked like it hadn't been used in years. "We need to get her out, now." Cross and Ramirez forced the hatch open. The tunnel behind it was tight but led upward, toward daylight. Monica, weak and trembling, nodded as Wagner supported her through. Step by step they climbed breathless. Smoke was beginning to fill the lower tunnels. Above them a faint glow. Then fresh air. Trees. They had made it out. As Wagner pulled Monica to safety, the fire roared behind them. Cross and Ramirez emerged last, coughing but alive. Behind them, the entrance to the underground network collapsed in flames. Whoever ran it, whoever had created this twisted game, had vanished with it. 2 weeks later, Monica sat in a quiet hospital room. Her body was healing, but the psychological scars ran deeper. Wagner visited her every day. She'd learned more in those days. Monica had been stalked long before she went missing. The man behind the radio frequencies had been a former audio engineer, obsessed with capturing voices. He believed he could make people live forever, through sound. He had no name, no clear identity. Just recordings. And while much of the facility had been destroyed, the hard drives they recovered told stories of other women. Some missing. Some still unaccounted for. The FBI took over. The case was declared a federal-level serial abduction investigation. The press dubbed him the Radio Phantom. Monica, though still traumatized, chose to speak out. Her voice, once manipulated, now became a force of truth. Wagner stood outside the hospital one morning as Monica's voice played over the local news station. Not a scream. Not a plea. But her own words in her own power. I survived. And I won't be silent. The nightmare had ended. But the hunt for the phantom had only just begun. Thank you for watching this chilling and emotional journey with us. A missing woman's voice was caught on a radio frequency, is a story of survival, hidden truths, and the power of never giving up. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another true crime story that grips your soul. Stay curious, stay aware. And remember, not every voice that fades is truly gone.